What's going on, shooters? DaVinci HD here, back with another video. Know it's been a while, but today we're going to talk about whether a camera from 2016 can still stand the test of time in 2022 going into 2023. So if you guys are ready, we'll get into it. Alright guys, so today we're talking about a special camera that is very, very dear to me. It's been my workhorse for the past few years since I started my music video career, and that camera is the Sony A6300 or A6300. This mirrorless camera was originally announced in 2016. Since then, we've seen a rise in quality of cameras like the 6600, A7 III, A7 IV, and as of recent, the Sony FX30. And we're going to talk about whether this guy right here can still hold up to some of the powerhouse cameras that have come out in recent years. Okay, so first we're going to get into the specs of this camera. The A6300 is 24 megapixels and can shoot 4K up to 30 and 24 frames per second, as well as shooting 1080p up to 120 frames per second. It also has the ability to shoot 720p, which nobody ever uses anymore. It films in XAVCS and AVC HD formats. This camera has an APS-C crop sensor and is compatible with all Sony E-mount lenses. When it comes to focusing, this camera has 425 face detection autofocus points. It has a minimum ISO of 100 and maximum ISO of 25,600, expandable up to 50,000. So to talk about some of the projects that I've done with this camera, I've shot well over 100 music videos with it, as well as several weddings. I was able to complete a couple business commercials with this camera as well. However, I like to stick with Panasonic and Blackmagic whenever I'm doing narrative work. So let's get into some of the pros of this camera. So the first pro we'll get into, which is probably this camera's best feature, is the autofocus. The 425 face detection autofocus points are more than enough for new shooters to take their camera out on various projects, most projects, and be able to shoot without having to worry about manual focusing, and they can focus on composition, lighting, and other various aspects of film. Another good thing about this camera, though not the best, is the dynamic range. Anyone familiar with Sony knows that this camera and ones that came after it came with S-Log profiles, which have very, very high dynamic range. These flat profiles are able to let you get the best out of your colors in post. However, I do strongly suggest that you light your subject properly before you go testing out these color profiles. This camera is also fairly decent in low light, though not as good as, say, the A6600 or Sony A7 IIIs or cameras after that. However, I was able to push the ISO up to 2000 and even as high as 3200 before I started seeing major noise in my footage. So for videographers who shoot more in darker situations, this camera can definitely help you, especially if you pair it with a decent, fast, sharp lens. A good lens, for example, would be the Sigma 16mm f1.4. Another good thing about this camera is it's very compact and lightweight for those who don't like a heavy setup as well. Also, with the Sony E-mount system, lenses for this camera are very, very affordable. But now into some of the things that I don't like about this camera. So out the gate, this camera is terrible with battery life. Now this is a known problem with Sony cameras. However, you're able to extend the battery life with this camera specifically if you pick up a battery grip. I mentioned this camera does have the ability to shoot 1080p at 120 frames per second. However, when you're in that mode, it does dim your LED screen, which is a definite problem. Also, another problem I ran into with this camera, which is a case-by-case basis because I haven't ran into enough people who have this problem, is the face and eye tracking. This setting tends to act a little quirky and tends to focus hunt whenever you're in the higher frame rate settings like 60 and 120 frames per second. However, I haven't talked to enough Sony users to know for sure whether this problem is anecdotal or not, which is why I stated this is a case-by-case basis. So those are the things that kind of rubbed me the wrong way about the camera, but now we'll get into the price. So this camera was $1,000 at launch back in 2016. However, now in 2022, you could probably find this camera for about $500 up to about $700, depending on where you get it from and what condition the camera's in. So by now, I'm sure you're tired of me talking about the technical specs of this camera and you want to see the image quality. So here's a quick highlight of some of the work that I've been able to do with this camera over the years. So my final thoughts on the Sony A6300 and whether it's worth it in 2022 going into 2023, my answer would have to be Yes. The 24 megapixels, 4K and 1080p make this camera more than enough for photographers, videographers, as well as hybrid shooters. The autofocus points make it great for newer shooters. Even with newer cameras stepping the game up as far as autofocus, it's still way ahead of most competition when it comes to autofocusing. So if you have an interest in this camera, I definitely give it the thumbs up. However, I do strongly suggest that you find this camera on the used market. So there you have it, guys. Those are my thoughts on the Sony A6300 for 2022 going into 2023. This has been my workhorse for a lot of years, which is why I was eager to get this video out, because I will be parting ways with this camera and going back to the Panasonic ecosystem. More on that in another video. But if you did enjoy this review, make sure you hit the like, hit the subscribe button, and be sure to hit that notification bell too, so you guys can be the first to see all the new content I drop. With that being said, I greatly appreciate you guys sticking with me to the end of this video. It's your boy DaVinci HD reminding you to keep pressing record. I'll see you in the next video.